Thank you so much. Ellen, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for that very warm New Hampshire welcome. I'm really delighted to be your keynote speaker this evening. Some of you may know that when I graduated from college, I did not have a STEM degree. I did not have an economics degree. I had a medieval history and philosophy degree. This is why I had to go to work as a secretary, which is how I started my business career. I typed and filed for a 9-person real estate firm. And when I eventually went on and got my MBA, I joined, as Ellen mentioned to you, I joined AT&T as an entry-level salesperson, and it was there 34 years ago that I met my husband, Frank, who is here this evening as well. Frank, if you wouldn't mind standing up so everybody can take a look at you. It's an interesting story. Frank was actually a technical specialist. That's how I met him. I was engaged in a sale to a customer, and he was a technical specialist. And I think the truth is I sort of fell in love with him immediately. Of course, he was cute and engaging and all that, but he took me seriously. And as a young woman in a man's world, that meant a lot to me. In any event, the reason I start with the fact that I had a degree in medieval history and philosophy is because, if you will forgive me for a moment, I'd like to just have us pause and think about the historical context in which we gather this evening. This is a wonderful group of entrepreneurs and leaders in business and government and education. And together you are working hard to make sure that New Hampshire remains an entrepreneurial center. And so it's worth thinking about the extraordinary times that we live in. For the first time in human history, any person, anywhere, can get any piece of information they like at the time and place of their choosing, on a device of their choosing, and communicate with anyone else anywhere in the world. That is remarkable. It is historic. It is revolutionary, in fact. And we have seen that this amazing ability for human beings to gather any information they want and communicate with anyone else they want, it can be used for good purposes or for bad. But make no mistake, it has never happened before in human history. And so I think we are at the cusp of an amazing time in human history, because what that power that I just described, the power to communicate, the power to gain information, knowledge, insight, that power put into the hands of an individual means that more things are more possible for more people in more places than at any other time in human history, literally. To give you a sense of where I think we are in this historic trend, I can remember giving a speech in 2001 in which I said that we are at the very beginning of a trend that would last for decades. And I described this trend as DMVP, a trend in which everything physical and analog would become digital, mobile, virtual, and personal. And we are living through this now. We saw at the beginning of the century whole industries turned upside down by the fact that a physical analog product became digital. Think music, think publishing. And then, of course, that digital product went mobile. And now all of that information that I just mentioned, all of that entertainment, all of that enlightenment, or not, depending on what you look at in the internet, but now it's all controlled by the individual. It's become personal, and we now know that virtual reality is becoming as compelling as physical reality. I remember probably 18 months ago being on a panel with Alan Greenspan, and we were having a discussion about Bitcoin. And I said that Bitcoin was the logical extension of this trend of digital, mobile, virtual, personal, and that I was quite certain that Bitcoin would one day upend the financial system as we know it. It will take a long time, but it will happen. Alan Greenspan had a different point of view, but I think we have seen just over the last 18 months how the financial system is now trying to adopt and adapt to the reality of Bitcoin. To give you a sense of how quickly this trend is happening, I mean, we all know it in our daily lives, and yet I think it's worth pausing and considering how fast this trend is really occurring. The iPhone was introduced in 2007. It feels as though we've always had them. But the truth is that marvelous device called the smartphone, which we all live in now, and which gives us tremendous power, is less than a decade old. In this historic context, and I think it is historic, in this marvelous century that is unlike any other century that has come before it, the fundamentals of entrepreneurship and innovation remain the same. What is an entrepreneur? I don't care whether the entrepreneur is the two guys that started Hewlett-Packard in a garage, Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, or whether it's the two guys that started the 9-person real estate firm where I was employed as a typist. They would be George Marcus and Bill Millichap, or any of you who are entrepreneurs, whether someone opens a dry cleaner or opens a firm that relies on nanotechnology to create great protective clothing for our fighting men and women. Entrepreneurs share one thing in common. They are risk takers. They are risk takers. And in particular, they take risks because they see things that other people don't see. They decide to create something new. They decide that whatever the current status quo is, that it isn't good enough for them. They're going to go change the order of things for the better. And because they see things that others don't yet see, being an entrepreneur is hard. It's hard because you have to work extra hard to have other people believe in what it is you see, especially when they can't see it. And you have to work extra hard to get other people to invest in what you see. Entrepreneurship and innovation at its core is risk-taking, and this means that at its core, entrepreneurship and innovation is also, always, mistake-making. Because if you are not making mistakes, you aren't taking risks. And if you aren't taking risks, you're actually not creating anything new. I say this because I think sometimes policymakers and politicians get mixed up about the fundamental nature of entrepreneurship. We say that we want innovation and entrepreneurship, but then we get nervous about mistakes. Many people have asked me, how as the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, we went from not even being in the top 25 innovators in the world to generating 11 patents a day. And there are two very simple answers to that question. One, we started measuring it, because what you measure connotes value. We started measuring, and people got the message that, gee, they must think this is important. There are many ways to measure innovation and entrepreneurship. Patent production is just one, but we measured it. The other honest truth is we tolerated people making mistakes. Because if you don't allow people to make mistakes, they'll never try anything new. And if they don't try anything new, they can never create anything new. And so this creates for, I think, politicians and policymakers and bureaucrats kind of a dilemma, because they say they like entrepreneurship, they say they like innovation, but truthfully, bureaucracies really can't stand mistake making. Bureaucracies, honestly, at their core, are what? They are rules-based, process-intensive, hierarchical organizations. And in a rules-based, process-driven, hierarchical organization, what's the way it works? The way it works is information flows up, decisions flow down, and the message is not take a risk. The message is follow the rules. And if you don't know what the rule is, don't use your judgment, send it up the chain. I bring this up because I think there actually is a valuable role for government to play, whether it is state government or local government or the federal government. I think there truly is a valuable role for government to play in fostering innovation and entrepreneurship, but unfortunately it is not always the role they want to play. I think the role of government is quite clear. First, government can do things that no one else can do. Government can invest in basic research that becomes a platform of capabilities upon which innovators and entrepreneurs can build. This is the history of the internet after all. It was the federal government who invested heavily in DARPANET, and that basic platform capability over time was commercialized and became the World Wide Web. Government sometimes as well can be a purchaser, a customer of leading edge technology because they can afford something that perhaps is not commercially viable yet. These are legitimate roles for government. But government's role is not to try to manage innovation and entrepreneurship. Government's role is not to pick winners and losers. You all know this. Many of you are entrepreneurs who are looking for capital all the time, and you know that one of the reasons that venture capital or capital of any kind is effective in fostering innovation is because it is demanding. I say to people all the time, forgive me for those of you who are entrepreneurs and looking for more money, but the quickest way to kill a promising startup is to give it too much money too soon, and then not to be demanding about the performance that you require. Because it is small, family-owned startup businesses, the entrepreneur who dares to take a risk, who dares to make a mistake, who dares to go on with their dream because they are so committed to it. Those entrepreneurs and innovators, small business owners, in fact, create 2/3 of the new jobs in this country and employ half the people. Most people start out like I do, like I did in that little 9-person firm. The overall market share of firms with less than 100 employees has fallen from 33% to 28% in the last decade or so. That's a big drop in the US economy. The number of startups annually has fallen 20% in the last 30 years. The 21st century, that historic context that I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, the truth is when you give an individual the power, the tools to gather any piece of information, to communicate with anyone else they want to, this upends power structures of bureaucracies. You've heard the old expression, information is power. Well, guess what? When every individual has the power to communicate and gain information, then suddenly power has left a bureaucracy and gone to the individual. This is what innovation and entrepreneurship is. It is, at its core, risk-taking and mistake-making. When I was a little girl, my mother looked at me one Sunday morning and said, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." I know, having traveled and lived and worked all over the world, that it is only in this country that a little girl, a young woman with a degree in medieval history and philosophy, whose only skill at that time was typing 87 words a minute. I know that it's only in this country that that young woman can go on and become the chief executive officer of the largest technology company in the world and run for the presidency of the United States. That is only possible here. And it's possible here, I think, because our founders knew what my mother taught me. Our founders knew that everyone has God-given gifts. And indeed, what I have learned over and over and over again in my life is that everyone has potential. In fact, everyone has far more potential than they realize. And every problem that I have ever encountered in my life, whether it was as an entry-level salesperson, or working my way up the ranks at AT&T, or a chief executive brought in to transform a company, or the chairman of 2 major charities in this country, whatever problem I have encountered, I have always found that people knew what the answer was. It's just they'd never been asked, and perhaps they'd never been given the freedom to use their God-given gifts, focus them on common goals and worthy purpose, and solve the problem. Our founders actually wrote our Constitution for a very specific purpose. They wanted to make sure that they conveyed that this would be a nation founded on what at the time was a radical and still is a visionary idea, that not only does everyone have potential, but that everyone has the right to fulfill their potential. I think that everyone has within them the innate capacity to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. I think everyone actually has the capacity to be an entrepreneur. I say that because I've seen it. I serve as chairman of the, until last Friday, chairman of the largest microfinance organization in the world called Opportunity International. We have been in destitute and desperate places in the world. We've lent $8 billion, $150 at a time. And I can go into the slums of New Delhi, India, or somewhere in a village in Africa, and I can find a woman in desperate circumstances, give her a helping hand, take a chance on her, give her tools, training, and support, and a $150 loan, and she will become an entrepreneur. It is a human capacity to see something new and to want to go build something new. What we need, I think, are leaders who understand what leadership is. Leadership is always about challenging the status quo. Leadership is always about seeing what is possible. In this way, entrepreneurs and innovators are the purest form of leaders. They see what is possible, even when others cannot see it, and they go create something new. Managers do the best they can within the status quo, but leaders change the order of things for the better. And so I believe now in this marvelous age that is unlike any other age in human history, when all kinds of things are possible for so many people, that we need leaders now who understand that their highest calling is to change the order of things for the better and unlock potential in others. I believe this can be America's greatest century. I believe this must be a century in which every American knows that regardless of their circumstances, their lives are filled with possibilities. And I believe we can be that nation if we will nurture and support and celebrate the risk-taking, mistake-making, seeing possibility nature of the entrepreneurs and innovators of this great state and of our nation. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.